History knows many cases when a single person personifies an entire epic. One such historical character was Hannibal, son of Hamilcar, Carthaginian commander of the last years of the First Punic War. Called by a divine name, he by the very fact of birth was an enemy of Rome and devoted his life to the war with the Republic. In addition to the traditional Carthaginian education, Hannibal was trained in the Greek language and Hellenic culture. He spent his entire childhood and youth in military campaigns and camps. Hannibal developed his intelligence and talent as a military leader, received military hardening and was raised in an army environment. He was the first to enter the battle and the last to leave the battlefield, said about him historians. Enemies could not forgive him numerous victories at the expense of ingenuity rather than at the cost of the lives of soldiers. Veterans of the Carthaginian army saw in Hannibal return to them Hamilcar, young soldiers respected for the care of people. Hannibal became commander of the army in 28 years. Hannibal went down in history as one of the greatest generals and strategists, almost destroyed Rome. According to legends, he swore before his father's deathbed that he would not rest until Rome fell. As we know, the gods decided otherwise. The peace made with Rome at the end of the First Punic War could not last long. Hannibal was well aware of this and was preparing for a new war for dominance over the Mediterranean. In order not to repeat the mistakes of the previous conflict and not to fight with the Republic until the complete exhaustion of resources, the Carthaginians had to take Rome. There was simply no other way out. Hannibal was well aware that the attempt to land in Italy from the sea will end with the fact that no Carthaginian soldier will not reach Rome. Rome had a well-established intelligence service, and a possible landing would have met the Republican fleet at sea and legions on land. The only route left was by land, through Carthaginian Spain. Like the First Punic War, the Second War began with a minor conflict over disputed territory. The Romans organized a coup in Sagunta, a Carthaginian city in eastern Spain, establishing the rule of a party hostile to Carthage. Hannibal responded by laying siege to the city. Accusations of breach of obligations were immediately exchanged. Rome protested and demanded that the siege be lifted. Carthage claimed that interference in the affairs of Sagunta was contrary to earlier agreements. A clash became inevitable. After taking Sagunta and strengthening his position in Spain, Hannibal decided to cross the Pyrenees. In order not to leave an open rear, he left in the conquered lands 11,000 troops led by his brother. Hannibal himself led an army of 50,000 infantry and 9,000 horsemen. Carthage remembered the mistakes of the past conflict, so these warriors were no longer mercenaries. Most of them were Libyans and Spaniards. Part of the army refused the Pyrenees campaign and was disbanded. Some deserted, but the main corps was ready to go to Rome. Crossing the Pyrenees was hard for Hannibal and his soldiers. Fierce resistance was provided by the Gallic tribes. People and animals died in the harsh conditions of the mountains. To reach the Rhone, Carthaginian had to fight all summer with the Gallic tribes, and to cross it, to enter into a heavy battle. From Gaul, Hannibal could go to Italy or the coast, where he would have to face a strong Roman army, Consul Publius Cornelius Scipione, or directly, through the Alps. Deciding not to delay the war and at any cost to reach Rome, Hannibal went straight to the mountains, hoping to attack from the northwest poorly defended Roman borders. Publius Scipio also avoided battle, sending most of his troops to Spain. The Alpine campaign was a very risky venture, but it was the one that made Hannibal famous for centuries. For 17 days of transition the army lost more than half of the people and elephants, to cross which on the narrow mountain paths was a particularly difficult task. During the first days of the campaign, the Carthaginians met little resistance until they crossed the Druentia River and began their ascent. As they approached the Alps, Hannibal's warriors were horrified at the sight of insurmountable mountains and glaciers, almost merging with the vault of heaven. It should be taken into account that the foothills were inhabited by hostile Gauls, perfectly familiar with the terrain and mountain trails, making their attacks unpredictable. With great difficulty and heavy losses on the 9th day, the Carthaginians reached the pass, where they rested for 2 days. Ahead of the army was a descent on slopes much steeper than those that had to be overcome on the ascent. On top of that, it was snowing in the Alps, which was completely unusual for the Carthaginian army. The army became despondent. It was then, as another legend has it, that Hannibal made a rousing speech, which has been brought down to us by the historian Titus Livius. Now you have not only defeated the walls of Italy, but also of Rome. From now on everything will go as on a flat, gentle slope. One or many, 2 battles will give into our hands, under our power fortress and the capital of Italy. At the end of the descent, the Carthaginians came across an impregnable rock, which was impossible to bypass because of ice and frozen mud. According to the mentioned Titus Livy, Hannibal made a huge fire. When the fire burned out, the Carthaginians poured vinegar on the red-hot stone, thus turning it into a loose mass. Thus Hannibal blasted the rock with vinegar. Then, having broken the rock cracked from the action of fire with iron tools, the Carthaginians made it passable, softening by smooth turns the excessive steepness, so that not only pack animals, but also elephants could descend. In total, 4 days were spent at this rock, and the animals almost died of starvation during this time. Local tribes of Gauls met Hannibal as a liberator and joined his army. If they were hostile to Hannibal, the campaign would have ended in the Alpine foothills, because from the Alps descended only 26,000 soldiers. Nevertheless, in Rome this seemingly insignificant threat was taken with the utmost seriousness. The Senate immediately mobilized all available human resources and assembled an army of 300,000 infantry and 14,000 horsemen. There were still up to 500,000 adult men in the Republic's reserves, capable of joining the legions. The first clash took place on the banks of the Ticino. Hannibal's army was inferior to the Romans in infantry, but twice exceeded the number of mounted, under the command of the Carthaginian transferred some Cisalpinskogo Gauls. The commander realized that tired of campaigns and worse-equipped army will not be able to resist the Romans in a frontal attack, and decided to act cunningly. The armies were located on different banks of the river. A small detachment of Carthaginian cavalry crossed the Ticino and retreated back, provoking the Romans in pursuit. The Roman legionaries crossed to the other side and immediately encountered Hannibal's army. When there was a foot battle, in the rear of the Romans struck waiting in the shelter of the Carthaginian cavalry, turning the enemy in flight. After the victory, Hannibal decided to strengthen in northern Italy, not risking to attack Rome. He expected to recruit allies, but only the Gauls agreed to openly oppose Rome and join the enemies of the Republic. In addition, time was running out. Because of the disease received in the campaigns, Hannibal lost sight in one eye. There was no supply and funding from Carthage. The new Roman consuls Gaius Flaminius and Gnaeus Servilius headed north to stop the Carthaginian campaign. Hannibal faced the 30,000th army of Flaminius at Lake Trasimeno and defeated it. Once again, cunning trapped the Romans in the valley of the lake and attacked from the rear. After that, under the control of Hannibal was already all of northern Italy. Despite the apparent successes, Hannibal was in no hurry to go to Rome, protected in full compliance with the status of the capital. The Carthaginian army was not strong enough to take the city and had no siege weapons. The Romans had a large and well-trained army. Moreover, to capture the capital, this is only half of the victory Rome was required to hold. Hannibal counted on the support of the Roman provinces, hoping that, seeing the defeats of the Republican army, Italians would stop supporting Rome. Throughout 217, he moved across the peninsula, trying to lure the Italic polities to his side and choosing the best base to prepare for the general battle for Rome. Neither succeeded. Carthage, meanwhile, was also in no hurry to help its commander in Italy, as Spain with its richest mines was under attack by the Roman army. Rome sought to capitalize on the indecision of its enemy. Elected dictator Quintus Fabius Maximus used the tactic of masterful inaction, not getting involved in battles with Hannibal. Maximus rightly believed that the enemy army could not last long without the support of Carthage and would be weakened by starvation, discord and disease. The silent confrontation lasted about a year, until the devastation of the Italian lands. Hannibal did not cause a wave of indignation of the Roman plebs. A second dictator, Marcus Muncius Rufus, was appointed to help, though rather to load, Maximus. Muncius immediately engaged Hannibal in battle at Chaeronea and lost. The war was dragging on. Rome could no longer tolerate the enemy army on its soil, and the enemy was in no hurry to crash against the Roman walls. In place of the dictator Fabius appointed consuls Gaius Terentius Veron and Lucius Aemilius Paul, at whose disposal the Senate gave an army of 80,000 infantry and 7,000 horsemen. Hannibal's army at that time included 40,000 infantry and 10,000 horsemen respectively. Another battle took place near the city of Cannae, captured by the Carthaginians to replenish provisions. The Romans camped nearby. As strange as it may sound, the consuls commanded the army in turn, every other day. Terentius Veron wanted to immediately attack the enemy and quickly return to the capital for the triumph. Aemilius Paul did not want to risk, considering the position of the Romans disadvantageous. And so, on the day of Veron's command, the legionaries moved to attack. Hannibal drew Veron on a wide plain, ideal for cavalry. In the center of the field, he positioned the Gauls, secretly expecting that they will not withstand the frontal attack of the Roman legions. During the battle, the Gauls fled, and the Romans who pursued them found themselves in a cauldron. Carthaginian cavalry and Libyan veterans attacked the Romans from the flanks and rear, slamming the trap. The Roman army was surrounded, lost maneuverability and was almost completely destroyed. Fell 44,000 legionaries, including consul Aemilius Paul. The survivors of 10,000 Romans, together with Varone, fled to Canusium. Hannibal lost 6,000 fighting men, 2/3 of whom were Gauls. So crushing defeat of Rome was possible due to the unrivaled military skill of Hannibal. Rome's hegemony in southern Italy shaken, the road to the capital was open. But even the victory at Cannae did not instill in Hannibal confidence in the victory over Rome. He feared that in the case of a siege of the capital for arms will take all citizens of the Republic. Instead of attacking the Eternal City, he began to recruit allies. Samnites, Brati, Lucanians, even Syracuse and Macedonia were ready to join Hannibal to complete the massacre of the woe-fed up with all of Rome. Carthage sent the commander small reinforcements, more to express approval of his successes. Hannibal captured Capua and fought minor battles in southern Italy. In Rome, panic was growing. The Senate left in the city a small garrison, incapable of serious defense. Matrons from noble families fled, weeping, to the temples, where they wiped the statues of the gods with their hair. Widows of fallen warriors, for the sake of preserving the noble family, got together with slaves and foreigners, an unprecedented practice for the arrogant Romans. The Senate even authorized human sacrifices, believing that the troubles of the Republic were caused by the disfavor of the gods. The historian Polybius wrote that the Romans, are most dangerous precisely when faced with a mortal threat. The entire population of Latium rushed to save the Republic in a fierce desire to defend Rome. To equip the army, people carried their savings. All men capable of holding a weapon became under the scarlet vexillums of the legions. Even slaves were taken into the army, promising them freedom in case of victory. It was time for Roman revenge. The Romans laid siege to Capua. To distract the legionaries, Hannibal came to a distance of a few miles from Rome, and closer to the capital of the Republic. He was never closer. Meeting 200,000 more men on the way against his 40,000, he was forced to retreat south. Capua returned to Rome. The Carthaginians withdrew to Brutia. Fate would yet give Hannibal a chance to win back. Ahead of him will return to Carthage, making peace with Rome and fleeing to Antioch. And we can only guess what thought half-blind warrior, pushed back by countless avalanche of enemies, realizing that all the work of 15 years of war was in vain.